Ever since we were kids, we've been told that our ancestors were brave hunters. They grabbed their spears, strode out across the African savanna, faced down giant beasts, and came back victorious. Picture the noble caveman standing on a hilltop, surveying the grasslands, stone weapon in hand, master of nature, king of his world, heroic, majestic, the dawn of mankind. Hate to break it to you, but not quite. For millions of years, our ancestors didn't hunt. They waited. They lurked. They spent a lot of time nervously scanning their surroundings with the specific expression of someone who knows, with absolute certainty, that they are not at the top of the food chain. And when the creature that actually was at the top of the food chain turned its back and walked away, they scrambled in and grabbed whatever was left. The thing they were stealing scraps from had a name: Pachycrocuta, brevirostris. The giant, short-faced hyena, a creature that evolution apparently designed by asking the question, what happens if we take a hyena, double its size, and then swap its jaws out for an industrial hydraulic press? And nature's answer was Pachycrocuta, the animal that, completely unintentionally, spent millions of years pushing the human brain to evolve without ever knowing it was doing so. Let the numbers speak first. Pachycrocuta weighed up to 200 kilograms. That is the size of a full-grown male lion. But a lion, for all its ferocity, is built for speed and a throat bite. Pachycrocuta was built for one single, pure-purpose, crushing bone. Its bite force is estimated to be the strongest ever recorded in any land-dwelling carnivorous mammal in Earth's history. Not a lion, not a bear, not a spotted hyena. Pachycrocuta. This animal could crush the femur of an elephant. The femur of an elephant. Its skull was short and unusually wide, not because it was poorly evolved, but because the entire architecture of its head was engineered to concentrate force. The lower jaw was thick and deep, massive temporalis muscles attached to a pronounced sagittal crest running along the top of the skull. When Pachycrocuta bit down, the whole structure worked like an industrial vice. Bones didn't crack, they shattered into pieces small enough to swallow whole. That was the key to its entire evolutionary strategy. Pachycrocuta ate the part that nobody else could reach: bone marrow, locked deep inside the thickest and most nutrient-dense bones of any carcass. Lions ate the meat. Leopards ate the meat. Wild dogs ate the meat. Every one of them left behind a pile of bones when they were done. Pachycrocuta ate the pile of bones. And that is precisely the niche our ancestors tried to wedge themselves into. This is where the story starts to get a little uncomfortable for human self-esteem. For decades, archaeologists excavated caves in South Africa, particularly in the Cradle of Humankind region, at sites like Sterkfontein and Swartkrans, and found thousands of bone fragments: zebra, antelope, giraffe, wild pig, and scattered throughout the bones of early hominids, along with crude stone tools. The initial conclusion sounded perfectly reasonable. This was a base camp for early humans. They brought food back here. They ate here. This was their kitchen. We told that story for decades and felt pretty good about ourselves as a species. Then paleoanthropologist C.K. Brain showed up. He looked at that same bone pile and started noticing things that didn't add up. The bones were fractured in very specific ways. Not the patterns you expect from human stone tools, but the kind of crushing damage you get from enormous force applied from the outside. The ratio of bone types in the cave was also deeply strange. Skull fragments and jaw sections appeared far more frequently than long bones from limbs. That is exactly the pattern left behind when a large hyena drags its preferred parts back to a den to work on at leisure. It wasn't early humans who brought food back to the cave. Pachycrocuta brought it. The cave was its dining room, and the early humans in that same deposit were either desperately trying to sneak in and steal some scraps, or they were featured on the menu themselves as the main course. Stop for a second, because this changes everything about how we see ourselves. The real picture of 2 million years ago isn't brave ancestors taking down big game on the open savanna. The real picture is this: Pachycrocuta has just killed a zebra. It eats the meat. It crushes some bones. Then it wanders off, maybe to rest, maybe to patrol its territory, maybe to find more. And at that moment, a group of Homo habilis, small, lean, standing about 4 feet 3, looking frantically in every direction like someone trying to jaywalk across a 6-lane highway with no crosswalk in sight, sprints in to work what's left of the carcass. Not for meat. The meat is already gone. For the bone marrow inside the pieces Pachycrocuta hadn't gotten around to crushing yet. They grabbed rocks. They smashed bones open. They pried out the marrow. They ate as fast as they possibly could before the actual owner of that meal came back. What? This is the origin of human civilization? Basically, yes. And honestly, when you think about it, this version makes a whole lot more sense than the heroic spear thrower in the textbook. Here is the most important thing the Pachycrocuta story gives us. It explains why we made tools in the first place. The traditional answer to that question is to hunt prey, but the fossil evidence increasingly points toward those earliest stone tools, the sharp Oldowan flakes, good enough to cut through hide and separate flesh, from bone being used primarily to process carcasses that were already dead, to cut fast, to extract whatever meat remained wedged in the tight spaces around joints and tendons. Before Pachycrocuta came back to reclaim its table, let's be direct about it. Stone tools were competitive weapons against hyenas, not weapons for direct confrontation, because direct confrontation with a 440-pound animal possessing the strongest bite force in mammal history is the single worst decision any creature could make. But weapons of speed and efficiency. Pachycrocuta crushed bones with its jaws. Homo habilis split bones and extracted marrow with sharp-edged rocks. 2 different strategies, exploiting the same resource in non-overlapping ways. Think of it like 2 competing businesses in the same city, each serving a different market segment and deliberately staying out of each other's lane. The arrangement was tense, but it worked. For a while, that arms race of competition lasted millions of years, and throughout that entire time, it pushed our ancestors to continuously improve what they were working with, from the rough, opportunistic Oldowan flakes to the more refined, carefully shaped Acheulean hand axes of later periods. Each generation of tools was a new answer to the same fundamental survival problem. How do we get more, faster, before Pachycrocuta gets back? But the tools are only the part we can hold in our hands and study. The more important development talked about far less in popular accounts is what was happening inside the social structure of Homo habilis groups as they dealt with Pachycrocuta's presence day after day, season after season, generation after generation. Alone, one early human was a light snack for Pachycrocuta, outweighed by nearly 5 to 1, slower over any meaningful distance. Weaker in every measurable way, there is no version of that confrontation that ends well for the hominid. But a coordinated group of 10 is a completely different situation. That group requires roles. A lookout positioned upwind, someone efficient at processing the bones, someone responsible for keeping the children quiet and moving, someone with the authority to call the retreat when the situation changes. And critically, they all need to communicate fast and accurately. Where is the carcass? Which direction is Pachycrocuta approaching from? How much time do we have before we need to be gone? That pressure, the sustained, relentless, daily pressure of sharing an ecological niche with a 440-pound apex bone crusher, demanded a level of social cognition that ordinary primates simply had no reason to develop. It demanded working memory, the ability to plan beyond the immediate moment, and the capacity to read the intentions and emotional states of others in your group. The cognitive building blocks that would eventually, across hundreds of thousands of years of incremental improvement, develop into actual language. Pachycrocuta didn't set out to teach us how to cooperate. It had no interest in our development whatsoever. But the evolutionary pressure it created accomplished exactly that over millions of years, like the toughest professor you ever had, the one who never once said nice work, but consistently gave you exams just hard enough that you had absolutely no choice but to learn the material, if you wanted to pass, which in this particular case meant staying alive. Pachycrocuta existed from roughly 3 million years ago until approximately 500,000 years ago. Then it disappeared. Climate change played a significant role. The African landscape gradually opened into wider grasslands, more favorable for fast-moving cursorial hunters and far less suitable for an ambush specialist that relied on patience, territory, and raw crushing power. Competing species like the spotted hyena, smaller and more lightly built, but more flexible and capable of coordinated pack hunting, gradually moved into and dominated the ecological space Pachycrocuta had held. But there is another factor that researchers have paid increasing attention to. By around 1 million years ago, Homo erectus was no longer scavenging from the margins. They were hunting actively and successfully. They controlled fire. They ranged across the landscape in large, well-coordinated groups. They used fire, noise, and sheer numbers to drive Pachycrocuta away from carcasses it would previously have owned without contest. The ecological balance had shifted slowly, incrementally, one small confrontation at a time, but the direction of travel was irreversible. We didn't kill Pachycrocuta directly. We were never powerful enough to do that. But we made its life progressively more difficult and more competitive at exactly the moment when changing climate was already squeezing it from another direction. And that combination was enough to push the species past the threshold from which there was no recovery. Looking back at all of this, there is something I keep coming back to. We like to tell ourselves that humanity rose to the top of the food chain through strength, through courage, through some innate fighting superiority that set us apart from every other species. But the real story is considerably more humble and, I would argue, considerably more interesting. Our ancestors didn't win by becoming stronger than Pachycrocuta. They won by finding the angle that the giant couldn't see, by cooperating tightly enough that nobody was ever completely alone, by improving their tools fast enough to stay one step ahead of a competitor that had every physical advantage imaginable. Every capability we take pride in about the human mind, strategic thinking, language, social cooperation, the ability to plan for a future that doesn't exist yet, may well have been shaped under one very specific, very real competitive pressure, standing 30 meters away from a Pachycrocuta and working out how to get that bone marrow without ending up as the next item on its menu. That was the first real problem our species ever had to solve at scale, and we solved it. Next time someone tells you that competition is the engine of progress, remember that this has been true for at least 2 million years. The difference is that back then, our main competitor weighed 440 pounds and could crush an elephant's femur with its bare teeth. If this gave you a different way of thinking about where we actually came from, leave a comment below. I genuinely enjoy reading what you think. Subscribe so you don't miss stories like this one. See you in the next video.